Thank you for joining us for tonight's edition of HR Mentorship Learning Series. Tonight, we'll be looking at the topic, managing executive compensation. Our facilitator for tonight is Oladiti Oluwaseyi, and I would like to introduce him to us. Oluwaseyi is a senior consultant in human capital with one of the top 4 consulting firms in Nigeria. He has experience working with clients across various industries, and he has worked in the compensation and benefit team of at least 2 of the top 4 consulting firms in Nigeria. Oluwaseyi specializes in designing equitable and competitive reward packages for clients from various industries. He supports his clients in monitoring and reviewing compensation and benefit packages to maintain competitive market position. Oluwaseyi has experience in compensation and benefits and incentive scheme design. He has been an engagement lead and member of various projects focused on compensation and benefits, incentive scheme design, executive and board level remuneration for clients across various industries. Oluwaseyi has a master's in industrial relations and personnel management. He has a bachelor's in sociology. He's an associate member, Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria, and is also a Google certified professional in data analytics. For the first time on this prestigious platform, it's my privilege and pleasure to have speaking to us tonight on the topic, managing executive compensation. Oladiti Oluwaseyi, you have the floor, sir.
So thank you, Mr. Adeosho. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me tonight. I'm honored to be here. So tonight we'll be discussing on managing executive compensation, and tonight's discussion will focus on, so we have introduction on executive compensation. We'll look at the component of executive compensation. So we'll look at executive compensation pay mix. So we'll discuss on designing executive compensation, then we'll look at the executive compensation in private versus the public company. Then we'll look at the role of remuneration committee in designing executive compensation. So let's get into it. As a brief introduction to executive compensation, so when we say executive compensation, so these are the remuneration packages received by high-level management personnel in the company. So this encompasses all forms of cash and non-cash payment that company used to attract, motivate, and retain top executive talent. So executive compensation actually differ greatly from the typical pay package for other categories of employee, and this is basically because executive pay is heavily tilted towards reward for performance. So executive pay is actually structured to reward corporate performance and to align executive pay with that shareholder value creation. So as a result of this, so unlike most of the other employee category, the majority of executive compensation is pay at risk. So that means most of the larger percentage of executive compensation is anchored towards achieving corporate objective. So in terms of looking at the components that makes up executive compensation, so these are the key components that makes up executive compensation. And the first one is the base salary or fixed pay or guarantee cash or guarantee pay, as it may be called. And this is the fixed annual cash payment, right? And this includes, or this is made up of the basic salary, the housing allowance, transport allowance, utility allowance, and every other allowances, right? That's that are being provided to executive for rendering their services. So this are the fixed annual cash payment, and it is tagged as a base salary or fixed pay. Then the other component that makes up executive pay is the variable pay. So this is pay at risk, and it is dependent on achievement of both individual performance and corporate performance. And the variable pay can actually be, divided into short-term incentive or long-term incentive and long-term incentive. So for short-term incentive, so this is an incentive plan that reward executive for performance over a period of 1 year. So performance can be measured by achievement of either financial or non-financial goals. Typically annual incentive scheme are expressed as a percentage of base salary, and short-term incentive scheme is always paid out in cash. So short-term incentive scheme measure performance of executive, over a 1-year period. And this performance measure could be financial and non-financial criteria. So at the beginning of every financial year, there are set KPIs, right? There are set objectives. And once these objectives have been met, there's going to be payout, bonus payout in terms of cash. So that is short-term incentive. So for long-term incentive, on the other hand, so these are incentive plans incentive plan with either a performance period or vesting requirement of over 1 year. So unlike the short-term incentive, long-term incentive measure performance, over a period of more 1 year. So typically between 3 to 5 year vesting period, right? And performance is typically measured, in the achievement of financial goal at the end of the performance period. So long-term incentive scheme is typically paid out in equity or share-based. So there are cases where it is paid out in cash, but most of the time, long-term incentive is equity-based. That is, payout is in form of company share, after the vesting period. Then other component of executive compensation is the benefit, right? So benefits is these are provided for as a financial protection for employee in case of health problem or other income after retirement. Then we have perquisite. Perquisite are special benefits that are usually non-cash item. So these are the core elements or core compensation components that makes up executive compensation, right? So just as a recap, we have the base salary, you have the short-term incentive and the long-term incentive, which both of them makes up the variable pay. Then we have the benefit and perquisite. Yeah, so still on the total executive compensation component. So here we have the base salary, and as I've mentioned earlier, so under this we have the basic salary, housing, transport, and every other ones that is being provided in cash annually. Then in terms of short-term incentive, there are various forms of short-term incentive. So you see annual incentive plan, you see profit sharing, you see discretionary bonus, you see commission-based annual incentive scheme. So for long-term incentive, so you see stock options, you see stock appreciation rights, you see restricted stock unit, you see phantom stock, you see performance share or performance unit, and you see deferred bonus. All these are all long-term incentive vehicle or long-term incentive plan. So in terms of benefits, so we have the retirement benefits plan, which are pension and gratuity. Then you have the life insurance, you have health and welfare plan in terms of your medical insurance benefit. Then you have the severance packages. So all these and more makes up the benefit aspect of the executive compensation. Then we have the perquisite. So perquisite, as I've said earlier, are the non-cash benefit enjoyed by executive for rendering their services, and this include status car and related benefits. So you see status car maintenance, status car fueling. Then you see your generator sets and related benefits. So that's generator set maintenance, generator set fueling. Yeah, so club and professional membership fall under the perquisite. So you see gym subscription, mobile phone. So all these fall under perquisite, right, for executive. So then moving on to objective of each of the compensation elements that has been mentioned above. So it is important to know that the use of each compensation element depend on your business strategy and reward strategy, and you have to also consider the prevailing market practices, right, and the financial capability and the organizational maturity. So if you look at this slide, you can see for basic salary, the key objective or the major objective of base salary is to attract and retain top executive, to improve individual performance and to establish internal pay equity. So for short-term incentive, the major objective is to align the executive compensation with the achievement of annual performance goal. As I've mentioned earlier, performance measure for short-term incentive is always over a single year period. That's an 1 year period. Another objective of short-term incentive is to provide a competitive annual cash compensation, to attract and retain top executive. Long-term incentive, on the other hand, the main objective is to align executive compensation with the achievement of long-term performance goal. to align executive interest with that of the shareholder and shareholder value creation, and to increase the retention value of compensation program, through vesting requirements. So this is done because most of the long-term incentive scheme vest over a long time, 3 to 5 years. So this actually increase retention of executive, because they typically want to wait till after the vesting period so that they enjoy the payout, that's the equity payout from the long-term incentive scheme. So for benefit, the major objective of benefit is to provide retirement opportunity, benefit and opportunity for deferred compensation, and to provide stability and well-being for executive even after retirement. So these are the key objectives of each of the compensation elements. And when putting in place your reward strategy or your pay philosophy, right? So you need to look at this key objective of each element and how you want to incorporate this into your reward strategy. So looking at compensation pay mix or compensation or element pay mix, right? So this is an illustrative pay mix for different job category. So the first bar is showing that for of executive, as we can see here, has a larger percentage of executive pay is variable pay, which is pay at risk. So you can see that long-term incentives takes 50% of executive pay, and short-term incentives takes 20%. So that is to say that 70% of, most of the time, 70% of executive pay is made up of variable pay, that's pay at risk, and is dependent on achievement of some corporate performance. So why 30% is the salary, the base pay, which is like a guarantee pay for them. So if you look at this bar, so as the category drops down, you can see that the salary increases. For instance, if you take the support staff, for instance, or just the professional staff, majority or the bulk of of their pay is base salary. The support staff, now 95% of their pay is base salary, while just 5% is annual incentive plan. Right. So this is to show that for executive, the bulk of their pay is pay at risk and is dependent on achievement of some corporate performance. And this is so because for executive, they have like a direct oversight on achieving organization objective, right? They have direct oversight, they have direct control over organizations achieving its set objective, be it short-term, mid-term, or long-term organization objective. So the executive have control over this, and you can see that a larger percentage or a larger portion of their pay is tied to organization performance. So designing executive compensation, right? You look at your compensation philosophy. So what is compensation philosophy? So compensation philosophy typically provide an overall direction and guiding principle, for how an organization want to deliver pay, and a comprehensive compensation philosophy and strategy will include the overall statement about the competitiveness and philosophy. So in your compensation philosophy, you want to state how competitive you want to be in the market. Where do you want to play in the market as an organization? Do you want to lead the market? Do you want to play at the market median, or do you want to play at the first percentile? So this is going to be stated in your compensation philosophy, right? So you have your pay philosophy. You want to anchor pay at the 75th percentile of the market as an organization, or you want to anchor pay at the 50th percentile, which is the market median, or you even want to lead the market at the top decile of the market, 90th percentile and above. So this, your pay philosophy will be stated in your compensation philosophy and strategy. So another thing to include in your pay philosophy or compensation strategy is the primary objective of each of the compensation program, right? The previous slide we've looked at each compensation elements and their key objectives. So you have to state the primary objective of each of this compensation program in your compensation philosophy. Another thing is to look at the statement about what component of your total compensation will be included and how would they be modeled, right? So what are the typical components of total compensation that you want to include in your remuneration package, and how are these going to be modeled in terms of pay mix, right? So your base salary, short-term incentive, long-term incentive, what percentage would they take in your compensation packages? So these have to reflect in your compensation philosophy. Then your guiding principle, which reflects the value and action of the organization, too, must be in the compensation philosophy. So compensation philosophy typically provide a foundation for pay-related decision, which can be shared with either the executive or the employee. So there are some key design consideration for a compensation philosophy. So when designing your compensation philosophy, you want to look at, so what is our philosophy purpose, right? So why are we putting this in place? What is our philosophy purpose? You want to look at what is our compensation objective? What objective do we want to achieve with this compensation, each of the P elements? What are the objectives that we want to achieve with this? So again, look at what is our business strategy as an organization. It is from your business strategy as an organization that your reward strategy will flow from. So reward strategy flow from your business strategy. Okay. So the key design consideration for a compensation philosophy. So when putting in place your compensation philosophy, there are some key design principles you have to look into. And the first one is your business strategy. So what is your business strategy as an organization? It is from the business strategy that your reward strategy flows from. Then from your reward strategy, you have your compensation philosophy. Then again, you look at what is our philosophy purpose? What is the purpose of this our philosophy? Where do you want to play in the market? So you look at your compensation objective. As I've mentioned in the previous slide, each of the compensation elements has the objective. So you want to look at what are we trying to achieve with each of these compensation elements. So what are your compensation element objective? Then you look at what is our focus on incentive and pay mix. So in terms of incentive scheme, variable pay, and your pay mix, what is the focus? What would the percentage be? What percentage of pay will be a variable pay? What percentage of pay will be fixed pay? So you look at this also. Then you define your talent market. So in defining your talent market, you look at who are our core competitor? Who do we say our core competitor are? Who do we say we want to benchmark our pay against? So you need to establish this. You need to establish your talent market, where you attract talent from and where you typically lose talent to as an organization. So this will make up your comparator organizations, right? To see anytime I want to conduct like a remuneration survey to see how we are doing as an organization against what the market is doing. So you have to have a selected comparator organization in place. Then again, another thing to consider is how much risk are we willing to accept as an organization. So all these are key guiding principle or key consideration in when developing a compensation philosophy. So I'm moving on to short-term incentive. So as I've mentioned earlier, short-term incentive is a form of variable pay and is one of the important elements of executive compensation. Short-term incentive scheme, or STI, is a form of variable pay or pay at risk, which is based on short-term goal, with a performance measurement of 1 year, right? And 1 year or less than 1 year. So STI is typically dependent on variables such as individual performance or corporate performance, and this is a pay as risk. That means it is not being paid if set performance targets are not met. And there are different form of short-term incentive scheme. We have the cash bonus, you have the commission-based incentive scheme, you have the profit sharing, right? And one important thing to note about short-term incentive is it is typically paid out in cash. Right, short-term incentive is typically paid out in cash after the fulfillment of the short-term incentive conditions. As short-term incentive scheme, are delivered based on predefined performance criteria. So what this means is, at the beginning of financial year, there are predefined KPIs, that are being set, based on organization objective, team objective and individual performance objective. So this will be stated at the beginning of FY, and so there will be minimum requirement, there will be target, and there will be maximum, requirement or this rate. So once this key performance indicator, once they have been achieved, there will be, incentive payout at the end of the financial year. So in terms of eligibility, to determine employee eligibility for short-term incentive and to determine payout at the end of the financial year, there are some consideration which includes, I think I mentioned this earlier. You look at corporate performance. So what is the organization performance as a whole over the financial year? So this performance, will include both, financial performance and non-financial performance. In terms of financial performance, you might be looking at revenue. What's the revenue target? Are we able to meet revenue target? Profit before tax, profit after tax, and every other financial indices that might be set at the beginning of the financial year. Again, also individual performance is being considered. Does this person meet expectation or exceed expectation? So this is also considered. In some cases, team performance is considered, or departmental performance. All these are considered to determine bonus payout, short-term incentive payout at the end of the financial year. And in some cases, payouts is at management discretion. That means at the beginning of financial year, no KPI was set and no communication about performance. But at the end of the financial year, the management can decide to pay out bonus, based on their discretion, right? And the main purpose of short-term incentive is actually to align compensation with the achievement of annual performance goal and to provide competitive annual incentive, to attract and retain top talent. Leading prices suggest that the inclusion of variable pay components in total compensation package is very important. Depending on the organization objective, some part of employee pay should be tied to meeting certain performance targets, which could be corporate performance or individual performance. Yeah, moving on to long-term incentive scheme, which is one of the most important component of executive compensation, if not the most important component of executive compensation, because as you can see from the pay mix that I presented earlier, long-term incentive actually makes up the 50%, of the total package for executive, right? So this is like the larger portion of executive pay is tied to long-term incentive scheme. And long-term incentive scheme or LTI scheme, is any incentive plan with either a performance period or vesting period of over more than 1 year. And there are several incentive scheme or incentive vehicles that organization can put in place to achieve, its objective. So what I have on this slide here is like a continuum. So long-term incentive scheme can be cash-based from one hand, and so cash-based incentive is value is delivered in cash, after the fulfillment of the whole criteria at the end of the vesting period. The payout, long-term incentive payout, is delivered in cash. And on the other hand, is the stock-based long-term incentive scheme, and where value is delivered in company share. Payout can be tied to achievement of performance goal, but ultimately employee will receive share of the company or stock, at the end of the vesting period. And at the middle of the two is the phantom stock, or phantom-based long-term incentive scheme, which combine the feature of both cash-based and phantom, based long-term incentive. For phantom stock is an alternative to issuing real share. Phantom stock follow the price movement of the company actual stock, paying out the resulting profit, in cash. Why phantom stock, look at the price of the stock of the organization. When the phantom stock is going to be paid out, it's going to be paid out in cash. So you can see that it's combined the feature of both the cash-based and stock-based option. So, and all these different vehicle, like that's long-term incentive vehicle or long-term incentive plan, they have their pros and cons. So for instance, if I take cash-based into incentive scheme, right, one of the pros, or one of the very importance of cash-based incentive scheme is that it has no impact on equity, that is, there is no dilution, right? And this is typically seen, this is typically adopted by the private companies, right? Because for shareholders in private companies, they are not typically open to share dilution. They don't want to give out shares. They don't want to dilute their shares, right? So they typically embraced a cash-based long-term incentive scheme. For the cons, for cash-based, so no equity ownership, right? So they are not giving out share to executive or to employees. So therefore, the executive may not really feel interested or invested in the company, right? Because when they as an executive, cash does not really motivate you again, but you want to be motivated by being a part owner, of the organization. So this is one of the disadvantage of the cash-based incentive scheme. And again, it is less ideal for a company that is trying to manage cash flow, because at the end of the vesting period, right, cash-based incentive schemes tend to be paid out in cash, and that means a very huge chunk. There will be a very huge cash outflow because you're paying out in cash. So for organization that is trying to manage their cash flow, right, a cash-based long-term incentive scheme, it is not ideal for them. For a phantom stock-based long-term incentive scheme, the pros are that there is no dilution. As I mentioned earlier, phantom stock it is paid out in cash, so there is no share dilution. It aligns the employee interest to that of the shareholder. It provides beneficiary or participants with a sense of ownership. Since phantom is actually tied to stock price, although it is paid out in cash. So there is this form of beneficiary having a sense of ownership, right? And it acts as a golden anchor and a retention too, because employee or executive tends to wait till after the vesting period, which is likely 3 to 5 years, right, for them to actually get the payout. So they wait with the organization for this period. So it's a form of retention too. So in terms of cons or disadvantage of phantom-based option, it lacks actual share ownership, and which may fail to sufficiently motivate executive. So it's just like the cash-based option too, because executive, right, at this stage of their career, they are not really motivated by cash alone. They want to be part and part of the organizations by owning some shares. But the fact that phantom based options are being paid out in cash, it does not or may not really motivate executive as the stock based would do. And again, another disadvantage is that company bond cash to settle their awards. So a company that is trying to manage their cash flow too may not want to settle for a phantom based option. So we can see both cash-based and phantom-based stock option are typically very popular among the private companies, because of their dilution effect, right? Both of them, there is no dilution, there's no shareholder dilution, right? So for private companies where they tend to manage shareholder dilution, so they tend to adopt a cash-based or phantom LTI scheme. So for a stock-based option, one of the pros is that it rewards participants for the creation of shareholder value, and it aligns the interest of shareholder and that of the participants, because payout is in equity. So when shareholder gain, the participants or the executive gain also, right? Because it is the major shareholder interest is increased in their price, in the share of price, right? So because the payout of the LTI scheme is going to be in stock, the employee or the executive are interested in the increase in the stock price. But in terms of the disadvantage of stock-based option is it leads to dilution of shareholder equity because some unit of share of the company is going to be set aside, to settle this stock-based option, right? So this leads to dilution of shareholder equity, right? And stock-based option is actually popular among the publicly quoted company, that's the public companies, right? So this is very popular among the publicly quoted company. Yeah, so moving on to this slide, this is just a diagram showing various LTI scheme options or LTI vehicle. So we can see here, LTI scheme could be share-based instrument or it could be cash-based. And looking at the share-based, it could be subdivided again to appreciation-based and true value. Then under appreciation-based, then we now have the stock option. We have stock settled, settled stock appreciation right. So that this is SAR or stock appreciation right that is settled in cash. Then under the full value, we have the restricted stock and the performance share. For cash-based instruments, it could either be appreciation-based too, and it could be others. For appreciation-based cash-based instruments, so we have the phantom option and the performance cash. As I've mentioned earlier, right, this phantom option and performance cash, they are paid out in cash. Then we have the deferred cash or the deferred bonus, right? So this is also paid out in cash, right? So there are other various forms of long-term incentive scheme plan or long-term incentive scheme vehicle, but these are the common one. And in subsequent slide, I will try to briefly explain some of them and how they work. Yeah, so here I'll briefly explain some of the common long-term incentive scheme plan. So we have the stock option. So the stock option give the participant the right to purchase a share of common stock at a specified exercise price, within a certain period of time. So ownership is received only after this participant exercise the stock option. So what this is saying is, so at the beginning of the program or the beginning of the long-term incentive scheme program, so a certain number of share is awarded to executive to buy at a certain price at a certain time. So I'll try to break this down to give an instance. So for the CEO, we might say the CEO is being allotted a 200,000 unit of share, right, at 5 naira per share. But the CEO will only be able to, take ownership of this share or buy this share in 3 years' time, which is the vesting period, or 5 years' time, which is the vesting period, right? So the CEO has the option of buying this share at that time. It is an option to buy, an option to exercise. The CEO might decide not to exercise this option. Maybe over the year, the stock has not been doing well or something, so the CEO might choose not to exercise this option. So it is an option that gives the executive the right to purchase, certain number of shares at a specific price. Most of the time, the price is at a discounted rate. If, for instance, at the grant date, the grant date is when the option is being given to the executive. If the current share price at the grant date, if it is 10 naira per share, all right, so the executive could be given an option to purchase it at 5 naira. So that's at the discounted rate. So it's a form of motivating them to say, but buy this number of shares. And again, this is going to align the interest of the executive with that of the shareholder, right? Because if the executive is now, a part and part owner of, of the company in terms of owning, shares, the executive want to work hard and make sure that the share price or the share quantity of the organizations, appreciate over a long time. Because once the share price appreciates, the executive too will gain from this. So that's how stock option works. Then we have a performance-based award. So participants receive a grant of company equity with vesting based on satisfaction of some performance condition. So performance-based awards is actually based on performance. Yes, some set of so performance-based awards could be cash-based or equity-based, but it is based on performance. At the beginning of the plan or at the beginning of the scheme, some performance are being set. So there are KPIs that align, KPIs that are derived from the overall organization objective. So KPI will be set to say in the next 3, 4, 5 years, if the executive is able to meet this KPI, so it could be both corporate-wide KPIs and individual KPI. So once this KPI are being met, the executive, it will be entitled to, it could be stock, it could be paid out in stock, and it could be paid out in cash, but it is based on performance. So there are set KPIs, there are set performance indicator that must be met before executive, gets payout of LTI scheme. It could be in cash or it could be in equity. Then there is a time-vested restricted stock unit. So this is a restricted stock unit, and this is so it's a form of stock option based too, but it is time vested. So what this means is executive or employee are given some unit of shares, but they don't have access to this share, or they don't fully own this share until after some time, after the vesting period, which is typically between 3 to 5 years. So it's like saying for the CEO, we've assigned you a 200 or 500,000 units of share, but you don't get to own this share until after 5 years. So it's a form of retention too, to say, if you are still with us in the next 5 years, you get to own this unit of share. Unlike stock option where they have to exercise their option, they have to pay for it. It might be directly, they could pay directly or indirectly. For restricted stocking, they don't have to pay. It is given to them for free. However, you need to be with the company for a certain period, right, before you can take full ownership of this restricted stock. Then we have the stock appreciation rights, which can be settled in cash or in stock also. Excuse me. So what this do is, SAR gives the participant the right to receive appreciation, in the value of employee stock, from the date of grants to the date of exercise. So I will try to break this down from the word stock appreciation rights or share appreciation rights or whatever it is, right? If 1,000 units of share is granted to executive at the grant date at 5 naira per unit. So 1,000 units at 5 naira per unit. That means now when we are granting it, that's the total share will worth 5,000 because it's 5 naira per unit and we are giving the executive, 1,000 units of share. So that's 5,000, right? Then over the year, which is the vesting period, maybe 5 years or 3 years vesting period, the share will have grown or the share price will have increased. The share price will have appreciated. So that's where appreciation comes in, right? If the share price has appreciated to 10 naira per unit, at the grant price, it is 5 naira per unit. But if it has appreciated, during the vesting period to 10 naira per unit, at grant price, we granted 1,000 units at 5 naira, that's 5,000, that's the total value of the share. But at vesting, it is now 10 naira per unit, that's 10,000. The value of the share is now 10,000 naira. So the difference between the 5,000, which is the value at grant, and the 10,000, which is the value, at vesting, it is what the executive gets. That is why it's appreciation right. So share appreciation right. It is the appreciation on it, that the executive gets. So in cases where the share does not appreciate, right, that means the executive, we typically not get anything. That means the executive has not done its job to increase the share value, right? So that's how share appreciation rights works. And it could be settled in stock or it could be settled in cash. Yeah, so on this slide is just to show the pros and cons of each of the stock option plan and how when they work best. For stock option, the pros is that there is a high linkage to shareholder value creation and it is easy to understand. The cons is that it is the most dilutive of all the LTI plans. That is, you are giving out share and you're diluting the shareholder equity. Then it leads to non-cash profit and loss expense. So this is in terms of accounting principle because you'll be giving out equity. So you have to cater for that in your non-cash profit under your profit and loss expense. When does this work best? That's the stock option plan. When does it work best? So this work best in a high growth environment where the primary objective, is share price growth, right? So where in an organization with an high growth environment and the primary objective is to increase the share price, then it's a stock option plan work best in this kind of environment. For a stock unit or a stock option, in terms of pros, it is retention focused instrument. As I've said, that's a stock. Executive don't get or participant don't get to fully own this until after the vesting period, which is typically 3 to 5 years, right? So it's a form of retention too. It is less dilutive than stock option, right? Because the executive or participant don't get to exercise shareholder rights until after the vesting period, right? Although they have been assigned this share or unit or stock unit, but they don't get to fully own it or they don't get to fully exercise their rights as a shareholder until after the vesting period, which is typically 3 to 5 years. Then it is easy to understand and implement. So there is no exercise price, there is no granting price. It's just saying you are giving this number of units. After 5 years, you get this. So it's very easy to implement and understand. In terms of cons, it may lead to employee gaining if the shareholder are not gaining because it's not typically tied to performance. It is not typically tied to share price increase. So at the end of the 5 years, what the executive just have to do is just to be with the company over the vesting period. Even if you're not increasing the value proposition to shareholder, you're not even growing the company. But because you're there, so it's a form of retention too. Even when the shareholder are not gaining, it might lead to the participant or the executive gaining. That's one of the disadvantage. Another one is it leads to a non-cash profit and loss expense, just like the stock option. So at the end of at the end of the vesting period, you have to expense this under profit and loss as a non-cash expense, right? So, and this will lead to non-cash expense under the profit and loss in terms of accounting principle. So where does this work best? So it works best in the steady environment and where the primary objective is retention. So where the primary objective is to retain top executive over a long time period, then RSU will work best in this kind of environment. So for performance share, in terms of pros, that's the advantages. There's a high linkage to fundamental business performance because at the beginning of the scheme, there are set KPIs that must be met before there will be payout. So it links organization performance to executive compensation. Then it is less dilutive than stock option because once performance are not met, there is no share to be awarded. Share is not going to be awarded, right? So it is actually less dilutive compared to like a restricted stock unit that is not tied to performance. So in terms of disadvantage of performance share, so it depends on accuracy of target setting, right? So you must be able, as an organization must be able to set the right target, the right KPIs must be set, and the KPI must actually link directly to achieving the overall organization's objective. And again, it is more complex, than other plans because for performance share, you need to set KPIs, link the KPIs to organizational objective, communicate, all these KPI at the beginning of inception. At the vesting period, you need to calculate whether the KPIs are being made, the performance being made. Is the minimum that has been made? Is it maximum? Is it target, right? So there's a lot of computation, right? So it's a lot more complex in terms of implementation than the previous incentive tools that we've discussed earlier. And it leads to a non-cash expense, just like the other two that we've discussed. So where does this performance share, where does it work best, right? So it works best in an organization where target setting is accurate. So for performance share to work for you as an organization, you must be able to set targets accurately. You must be able to put forth KPIs that are linked directly to organization's objective. So this work best where target setting is accurate. The other one is phantom option. Right. So for phantom option, the advantage is that there is high linkage to shareholder value creation because it is when the stock price increases, that's when the phantom option to increase, right? So and there is no dilution. There is no dilution. Actual share are not being given. No stock is given, so there is no shareholder dilution, and this is very popular among the private companies because typically private companies don't want to give out shares, don't want to dilute their shareholders' equity. So in terms of disadvantage, so there is a cash expense because at the end of the vesting period, phantom stock option is paid out in cash, so there is high cash expense. And so for a company that is trying to manage their cash flow, phantom stock will not work or it's not the best option for them. And again, another disadvantage is that it is funded from the company cash account. So, right, so it's basically relating to the first point. So it's actually funded from company cash account. So where does this work best? Where does phantom option work best? So the primary objective is share price increase. So and there is no dilution. So because phantom option is typically anchored to share price increase, right? So when you're looking at increasing your share price as an organization, so when you're looking at increasing share price and you don't want to dilute, you're not willing to give out you are not willing to give out any share to executive or to participant, right? So you can look at phantom option. And again, when target setting is inaccurate, maybe you're not able to set targets, you're not able to set performance indicators, right? So you can look at phantom stock. And as I've mentioned earlier, so phantom stock is popular, among the private company. So the other one I have here is performance cash. In terms of pros, so there is a high linkage to fundamental business performance. There is no dilution, just like phantom option, right? So it's performance cash, although it's performance based, but payout is in cash. So there is no dilution at all. Then there is high linkage to profitability because it is performance-based. Some set KPI, some set performance must be met before there is payout. So there is high linkage to profitability. So in terms of disadvantage, it leads to cash expense, just like the phantom stock, since payout is going to be in cash. So there is going to be a cash expense, and it depends on accuracy of target setting. You must be able to set accurate targets, for performance for this to work. And so where does it work best in terms of organization environment that this work best? Where it works where target setting is accurate, right? So when there's less risk of gaming and target being too stretched, right? So these are just there's some pros and cons of each of the long-term incentive vehicle or long-term incentive plan, and which environment do they work best in. Yes, so in designing executive compensation, there are some focus area you need to look at. So, with the changes in the environment around the structure of executive compensation, so organizations are likely to adopt a pay for performance compensation for their executive, right? So, and again, in implementing any changes to executive pay, on this slide, I've presented some critical factor or some critical things to consider, when you're designing your executive pay. And the first one here is financial discipline, right? It is important to focus on what is affordable, right? So while you are trying to strike the balance between, competitiveness, you want to be competitive in the market, you want to be able to attract, the right talent by paying competitive pay, you must be focused on affordability and sustainability, right? Are we able to sustain this pay over the long period of time? Right, so look at affordability, sustainability, and financial discipline. This is very important. Another key thing to look at when designing your executive pay is pay for performance. From our discussion so far, you could see that the larger portion of executive pay should be tied to performance. So your executive pay should be tied to performance. So this will ensure that the organization performance metrics reflects, the expectation of the shareholder, right? So tying your executive pay, to that of shareholder value creation is very important when designing your executive compensation. Another key factor to consider is risk and internal control. So since the larger portion of executive pay is tied to performance, there is tendency for executives to take some high risk, right? So it is very important to put in place steps and control, to checkmate this risk or to minimize executive taking some high risk, right? And this is where clawback come into play. So organizations typically use clawback to curb bad practices by the executive. Clawback actually keep executive in check of any wrong behavior, such as excessive risk taking or forces of company profit. So what clawback does is when you put clawback in a executive compensation, what it does is if there are misstatements in the company financial performance, maybe there are some misstatements in the company financial performance, so that executive could do this so that they could get some form of bonus or pay that are dependent on performance. So maybe after some years, the company discovered that there are some misstatements in their financial performance. They have the right to claw back some percentage of pay that they've paid to executive to say, okay, because this payment was made based on the misstatement in our performance or financial performance or whatever, we are clawing this back because the statement is not true. So that's what stock back does, right? So when stock back is clawback is incorporated into executive pay, so it gives the organizations opportunities to claw back some percentage of pay that they've already paid to the executive, in the case of misstatement in their financial statement. So another thing to take note or critical factor to take note when designing executive pay is the severance package, right? So it's actually an important element in executive compensation, right? So severance package is an agreement between an employer and an executive that detail the term and condition of termination of employment. So severance package or severance pay actually documents what are the executive entitled to in terms of payment and benefits, after termination or after expiration of their tenure. right? So severance pay is actually key, another key consideration you should take note of when designing executive compensation. Also, when you're designing executive compensation, so there are some external and internal forces that need to be considered. So there are external and internal forces that actually control executive compensation. Right. So for external influence or external control, so you look at government and regulatory bodies or policy. So there are several government policy, that guide executive compensation. For instance, in Nigeria, you have the NCCG, you have the SEC code, right? All these code and policy, right, states what the executive compensation should look like, what the board compensation should look like, right? So these are part of external influence, right? Or external factor that influences executive compensation. They look at competitive environments, right? You want to be competitive in the industry. You want to be able to pay competitively to attract the right executive from the industry, right? So you look at again, industry condition. What are the other people doing? What is the condition in the industry? So these are part of external influence that should be that will external forces that will influence what you pay your executive. Also, you look at macroeconomic environment in terms of inflation, in terms of cost of living, right? You look at all this to to determine what your executive pay should be. So in terms of internal factors that influence executive compensation, to the first on the list here is financial and stock performance, which is very important, right? So from all the discussion we've been having, we know that the larger portion of executive is based on performance, right? So we look at the financial performance and stock performance, over the period. You have to do like an historical analysis of the performance, right? Financial performance and stock performance of the organizations to now see how you set the right target, how you set the right KPIs, to flow into the organization's objective, and to be able to link the executive compensation with shareholder value creation. Right. Another internal factor to consider that influences executive compensation is your business strategy. Right. So it is from the business strategy that you derive your reward strategy, which will state what are your key reward indicator. What are you looking at? What are the key elements key compensation elements you want to focus on, right? So you derive this from your reward strategy, which flows directly from the business strategy. Then you look at your compensation philosophy. I think we've spoken at length on compensation philosophy. So this show where you want to play in the market. What's that philosophy? Do you want to acquire the 75 percentile at the 100 percentile? Do you want to play at the first quartile? So your compensation philosophy is another internal factor that influence executive compensation. Then you look at affordability, fund availability. I mean, you should look at what you can afford as an organization. What can we afford, right? In terms of fund, what is available, what can we give us? So this is very important consideration too. Then we have organization culture, your retention and attraction. So on the year, I've actually presented like a example of how external influence on compensation, right? So for instance, if there is a pressure for increase on return on investment on executive compensation, maybe from shareholder or from external agency, right? If there are pressure on increase on ROI, that means what this means is there could be pressure to say there must be a return on investment on the compensation we're giving to executive. So what this will lead to is there will be emphasis on pay for performance, right? And this will increase the use of performance-based compensation for executive. So this is just a way where external factor could influence compensation for executive. Okay, so this is to show a slight difference that is used between the private company and the public company when it comes to executive compensation. According to AON survey in 2019, so executive at public companies received around 40% more than those at the private company. And the driving factor behind the gap is prevalence of long-term incentive at the public company, right? So this is actually long-term incentive scheme is the major cause of this disparity between pay, in the private companies and the public companies, right? And here we can see the major difference for private companies, right? They really offer equity based LTI scheme, due to dilution issue, right? I think I've stressed this enough because for private company, they don't want to tamper with dilution. For instance, now a private company that is family owned, where the shareholder are siblings, or family, right? And they're not open to diluting their share. They're not open to bringing in new shareholder, right? So they wouldn't want to give out or they would not want to adopt any equity-based long-term incentive scheme. So for private company, they really offer equity-based long-term incentive scheme because of dilution issue. While for public company, they offer equity, more often. And in fact, most of the time, they even use it to raise some form of capital. For private company, they offer less competitive equity-based incentive, right? So even when they are offering equity-based incentive, the percentage might be low, right, compared to what the public company will offer. So for public company, they usually offer more competitive equity-based incentive. And for private company also, a small number of executives, they are the ones that receive significant equity stake. For instance, right, long-term incentive scheme that is equity-based can just be given to the key roles, right, in private organization, like the CEO, the CFO, right, and some key directors, the CTO, right, to just be limited to those key roles, right? But for public companies, right, more executive receive equity, even from manager level. You see, from manager level, senior manager they are entitled to equity-based and long-term incentive scheme, right? So for private company, LTI plan heavily rely on cash. I think I've stressed it enough. They tend to adopt a cash-based incentive scheme for private company, while for public company, they rely more on equity-based LTI plan, and it's mostly restricted stock plan and performance share unit. Right, so these are just some key differences between how a private company will structure its executive compensation to how a public company will structure its executive compensation. So I think we cannot discuss executive compensation without the remuneration committee. So remuneration committee or compensation committee, they are a group of board members that made up a committee member from a company board of director, and they're responsible for designing and optimizing executive compensation package. So the main role of a compensation committee is actually to set the pay for the top executive, right? They evaluate and approve performance criteria for executive. They set appropriate and supportable pay program that are in the organization best interest, and they align it with the business mission and strategy. And they also actively oversee, evaluate, and monitor the soundness of every compensation program that they put in place. But again, as company grows, as organization grows, the compensation committee roles often evolve and focuses more on the following, right? So they focus more on governance, oversight, and decision making, right? And they try to they focus on evaluation of the compensation program and arrangement to make sure that they are performing as intended. And again, they review, they approve, and they monitor compensation plan that balance the risk and reward. And they have effective control and risk management process in place. So this is where we'll be drawing the curtain. This is where I'll be drawing the curtain to my presentation. So take questions and comments. Mr. Joshua, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oluwaseyi, for that excellent and highly insightful session. Very in-depth, very detailed, and very succinct. This is not the kind of topics that is discussed so readily and so frequently. And yet, this is a very important area that HR professionals need to be aware of, especially those HR professionals who aspire to attain C-suite in their HR career and in their HR journey. I already dropped 2 questions on the chat. One of the questions is on what you call sign-on bonus. Okay, sign-on bonus. that would you like to say something briefly around sign-on bonus? Is it also part of executive compensation?
Yeah, so sign-off bonus, right, is actually not limited to executive compensation alone. So sign-off bonus is actually used to attract, top talent. Most of the time, you could actually use this to attract, maybe you're trying to fill a very technical and very scarce role, right? And maybe the competition for this role is very, very tedious in the market, right? So sign-off bonus is a form of pay that is given to employee after they join the company. So it's a form of incentive to attract, top talent in the industry. And it's a form of executive compensation, right? But it is not just limited to executive compensation alone. It could be, given it could be adopted to attract, top talent in a very critical role, right? Yeah, so.
Thank you so much. The other question I dropped is that what is the involvement of the typical HR practitioner or professional, okay, in the executive pay design and implementation? Who designs
Okay.
it? Is it the remuneration board committee or is it the HR department typically?
So in most cases, the REM committee, in conjunction with maybe an external consultant, typically design the executive compensation, right? So it is after the design that it's maybe the HR, maybe in conjunction with the HRD, that's HR director, right? They look at this together, design it. But typically, in most cases, the REMCO and an external consultant, comes together to design the executive compensation. I've seen cases where HR department does not even know what a CON, right? So there are cases like that.
One of the reasons could also include the fact that most organizations, when they are designing executive compensation, they also want to benchmark, especially against the industry. And
Industry,
it's
what's in
sometimes
the
way
industry
easier to leverage the expertise and technicalities of
of external
specialists in
consultants.
consulting firm. And again, because of confidentiality, you don't sometimes want this information because when you go to the frontline worker or employee and they hear the package of the director, they may almost want to faint, even though they may also not have a real appreciation of the
Of
volume
what the
of work
director is doing.
and the experience and the network the director is bringing to the table. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do we have any other question? I see one question here. Someone here says, are there generic templates for such compensation and benefit framework? I don't know your response to that.
So for executive compensation, I know there are a couple of documents you could get online for design executive compensation. However, this could not be exhaustive, right? In designing a competent and a detailed executive compensation, you might need to work with a consultant, with who typically do this. They have access to several information. They have access to what the market is doing. They have access to trends in the industry, from various environments, both local and international. What are people doing in terms of executive compensation, right? So you might want to seek the expertise of external consultant. But you can actually get templates online, right? But
All right. I want to most sincerely thank you, Mr. Oluwaseyi Oladiti, for so generously, magnanimously, giving us a top-notch expose on managing executive compensation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will encourage us to please watch this again and again so that you can get the full meat of what has been discussed exhaustively in the last 1 hour. I see another question here. Sophia says, what of ESOPs? You want to say something around this?
what is ESOPs? ESOP is a form of long-term incentive scheme. This is employee stock option plan, right? So it's a form of a long-term incentive scheme, and it's typically paid out in equity. So it's equity-based long-term incentive plan. So it's part of what we've discussed earlier, right? So it's just so there are various names that people just give to this long-term incentive scheme. So it's a form of stock option plan, right? So it is employee stock option plan. That's ESOP actually.
Thank you. Ayodele is asking here, he says, sir, I want to know if this can be introduced to a one-man business. Executive compensation, the whole gamut of what we've been discussing so far today.
Definitely, this can be introduced to a one-man business, right? So you want to, in fact, there are private organizations who are actually designing their executive compensation to include variable pay, right? Because as a one-man business, you also want to improve performance. You want to align the interest of your top employee to the interest of the owner of the business, right? And the best way to do this is to put in place a performance-based payment to say, if you help me to grow my business to this point, this is what is the need for you. You know, as a manager, as an executive in the business, if you help me to grow my business to this point, this is what you're getting. It might not be a form of equity, you know, because private organization doesn't really tend to give out equity. It might be a form of cash-based incentive scheme, but there are, you know, set criteria, set KPI at the beginning of every financial year to say, if you're able to grow my revenue, maybe to over maybe 120% or whatever percent, 20%, if you're able to grow my revenue consistently over the next 3 years, you will get the percentage of revenue you grow for me, right? So it's a form of, that's the form of profit sharing to say, if you grow my profit, this percentage will be given to you, right? So this could actually be introduced into a one-man business, right? And is a form of way to improve performance in the one-man business too.
Thank you so much. One or two people asking for your contact. If you don't mind, you can type it in the chat box. Maybe your phone number, email, whatever you're comfortable sharing, your LinkedIn handle. Please share it on the chat box so that they can see it. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very enjoyable session. Just to give us heads up, next week, Friday, by 8 p.m., we'll be having him on a second installment on another topic in the area of compensation, benefits, reward management. And I'm excited at what we are doing on this platform and how professionals like Oladito Oluwaseyi are providing their support pro bono just to help upskill and upgrade everyone. At this intersection, I would like to enable all of us to unmute and express our gratitude and appreciation to our facilitator for tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Hi,
Ola.
thank you so much, Mr. Ola. It was an insightful
Thank you, Mr.
session.
Oluwaseyi.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
So
Thank
much.
you,
It
sir.
was the time.
Thank you, Mr. Diosho,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
having
it
me.
was.
Thank you, everybody, for being
It
here.
was the time.